Whispers of the past. The redolence of cedar permeated Chuck's compact workshop, a usually welcome balm to his perpetually tense muscles. His roughened palm glided over the rocking horse taking shape, its graceful lines a sharp contrast to the jagged edges of his history. Each element was painstakingly rendered, a scaled echo of the toy he'd never crafted for a child of his own. The drone of sandpaper against wood filled the space, a meditative hum banishing the specters that often haunted his thoughts. Wood was preferable company, its taciturn nature a relief from the clamor of bygone days. The piercing jangle of the landline shattered the calm like a dropped hammer. Chuck paused, hands suspended over the nascent equine. Calls were rare. Most knew he favored solitude. He lifted the receiver, his voice a gravelly murmur. Harrison. A broken sob greeted him. Chuck. It's Maria Rodriguez. Her voice, a fractured thread, barely audible. His grip tightened. He hadn't heard from her in ages, not since his exodus from Chicago. Maria? What's wrong? The rocking horse became a sudden weight, a symbol of a life unlived. They're squeezing us, Chuck. Threatening everything. The words poured out in a torrent, punctuated by ragged inhalations. The serpent's kiss. Extorting protection money from the bodega. Said they'd torch it if we don't comply. The name struck him like a physical blow. The serpent's kiss at a festering sore he believed long excised. At a tide of nausea threatened. The cedar scent replaced by the bitter tang of fear laced with cheap liquor. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing measured breaths. Maria, slow down, unspool it for me. She detailed the preceding weeks, the escalating menaces, the veiled intimations evolving into stark demands. Miguel, her son, had attempted defiance, only to be met with a savage beating that left him bruised and shaken. He's just a boy, Chuck, defending his own, but they're too strong. Chuck heard the desperation clinging to her voice, the raw terror mirroring the faces he remembered from his time in the city. He knew the serpent's kiss's capabilities. Vermin, flourishing in darkness, preying on the weak. Where are you, Maria? He asked, his voice hardening with a newfound edge. The years of carefully fostered tranquility were fracturing, uncovering the steel beneath. Still in Chicago, Chuck. I'm at a loss. The police, they're helpless, too afraid. He envisioned Maria, her dark eyes wide with dread, her powerful hands trembling. He recalled her laughter, the races through their neighborhood streets, her voice a vibrant melody in the urban discord. He remembered her gentle touch bandaging his battered hands after a brawl. He couldn't fail her. Not again. I'm coming, Maria, he stated, his voice devoid of inflection. I'll be there as fast as I can manage. He replaced the phone, the ensuing silence heavier, more oppressive than before. The rocking horse felt like a taunt, a reminder of the existence he'd vowed to embrace. The life he was now forsaking. He moved to the window, the serene vista of rolling hills and grazing cattle failing to calm the storm within. His past loomed, a protracted, tortuous path paved with brutality and remorse. He'd been Chuck the Hammer Harrison then, a name whispered with dread and deference in Chicago's underworld. He was the resolver, the one who eliminated complications, and he excelled at it too well. Voices silenced, bones broken, boundaries irreparably crossed. The guilt had burrowed deep, consuming him from the core. That drove his departure. He couldn't stomach the reflection he saw in the mirror. He'd shed that identity, burying Chuck the Hammer beneath layers of anonymity and placid isolation. He sought absolution in the simplicity of woodworking, finding solace in the palpable beauty he could fashion. He'd cultivated a new existence, a life of serenity, far removed from the carnage he'd left behind. But Maria's plea had pierced the painstakingly constructed facade, resurrecting the memories he'd fought to suppress. The serpent's kiss. They were a symptom of the contagion he'd fled, a suppurating wound resistant to healing. That he knew his course, that he couldn't stand idly by while they terrorized Maria and her family. He wouldn't let the shadows engulf her. not after it had consumed so many. Before that he owed her that much, he owed it to himself. He crossed to a neglected corner of the workshop and tugged back a heavy canvas. Beneath lay a weathered leather bag, its contents carefully guarded. That he hesitated, his hand trembling as he grasped the zipper. Inside, cradled in oiled cloth, were the implements of his former vocation, instruments untouched for years. That a silenced Beretta 92 FS, a combat knife honed to lethal sharpness, and a pair of worn leather gloves. That he retrieved the gun, its chilled metal a familiar weight in his palm. The years dissolved, and Chuck the hammer stirred within. He hadn't desired this, he'd attempted to escape that life. But some debts defied repayment with time and honorable intentions. Some debts necessitated a different currency. He glanced back at the rocking horse, its gentle curves a poignant reminder of what he was safeguarding. He zipped the bag, the sound of final, unalterable decision. That he was returning to Chicago, that he was heading into war. And the serpent's kiss was about to discover that some hammers never lose their edge. Shadows in the valley. The ride toward Harmony Creek was a discordant symphony of verdant valleys giving way to cracked asphalt arteries. Gaudy billboards hawking impossible futures vied for attention with folksy signs advertising local honey. Vigilant, Chuck scanned the surroundings, the Glock beneath his jacket a cold steel promise against the darkness he'd struggled to outrun. Harmony Creek was anything but serene. A stifling atmosphere permeated the air, thick as the summer's swelter. Once vibrant facades now sported the dull patina of neglect. Residents shuffled along, eyes fixed on the ground, avoiding connection. Even children's laughter seemed muted, tinged with apprehension. This wasn't small-town tranquility. It was a town gripped by fear. He located Maria's bakery, Dulce Sueños, sandwiched between a boarded-up hardware store and a pawn shop. The aroma of sweet bread, normally an irresistible invitation, was subdued, almost apologetic. A scattering of patrons occupied the mismatched tables. There, conversations hushed whispers from across the street. Leaning against the dented fender of his truck, Chuck saw it. A black sedan, an obsidian shard in the rustic landscape, gliding to a stop before the bakery. 4 men unfolded from the vehicle, their swagger a blatant display of dominance. The serpent's kiss, subtlety was not in their repertoire. 1 slouched against the doorframe, arms crossed, a silent enforcer. Another loudly griped about the price of the pastries, his tone laced with corrosive sarcasm. A third began recording the interior on his phone, lingering on the faces of the customers. The fourth, a mountainous figure adorned with a serpent tattoo that snaked around his throat, approached a young mother clutching her child. He bent low, his voice a guttural rumble that made her recoil. Chuck's jaw clenched. He hadn't even exchanged a word with Maria, and already the coppery tang of violence returned to his palate. The scene unfolded with excruciating slowness. The woman stammered excuses, scrambling for her wallet. The tattooed man chuckled, a sound as cruel as shattered glass. Physical contact wasn't necessary. The terror he inspired sufficed. Enough. He pushed away from the truck, the familiar heft of the Glock a grounding presence in his hand, and no need to brandish it yet. He simply walked, his stride betraying nothing, his gaze laser-focused on the man tormenting the mother. By the time Chuck reached the entrance, the tattooed man had moved on, his predatory focus now fixed on Maria, who stood behind the counter, her face drained of color, but her spine ramrod straight. He hovered close, his voice a sibilant whisper that crawled along Chuck's nerves. Business slowing down, Maria? Maybe some protection money would help things rebound. Chuck stepped between them, an unyielding barrier. The man pivoted, his eyes narrowing. He registered the lines on Chuck's face, the weariness etched in his posture, but saw something more, a chilling stillness, a glacial resolve that gave him pause. "She's busy?" Chuck said, his tone a low growl. "Why don't you take your problems elsewhere?" The man's lips curled into a sneer. "And who's going to make me?" Before he could escalate, Maria's voice, surprisingly firm, cut through the tension. "Chuck? Chuck Harrison. Is that really you?" Recognition sparked in her eyes, quickly followed by a wave of profound relief. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and brushed his arm. "You came. I said I would." The tattooed man's smirk vanished. He glanced from Maria to Chuck, then back again. This clearly wasn't part of the plan. He retreated slowly, gesturing to his crew. "We'll be seeing you, Maria," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "And your new acquaintance." They crammed themselves back into the sedan and roared away, leaving a cloud of exhaust and a palpable sense of unease. Maria slumped against the counter, her breath hitching in her chest. "Oh, Chuck," she breathed. "Thank you." A young man emerged from the back room, wiping flour from his hands. He was slender, with gentle eyes and a hesitant smile. "Mom, what was all that about?" He froze when he saw Chuck, his expression shifting from curiosity to guarded concern. "Miguel, this is Chuck Harrison," Maria said, her voice regaining its composure. "An old friend." "Chuck, this is my son, Miguel." Chuck gave a curt nod. Miguel hesitated, then extended his hand. Chuck grasped it firmly, noting the rough texture of the boy's palms. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Harrison," Miguel said, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. "Just Chuck," he corrected. "The pleasure's mine." Though, gauging the worry etched on their faces, Chuck knew the pleasantries would be fleeting. This was merely the prelude. The shadows over Harmony Creek were deepening, and he was standing directly in their path, the serpent's lair. The cloying sweetness of yeast and cinnamon clung to Chuck like a second skin as he left the bakery, stepping onto the rain-glazed pavement at a shiver, sharper than the lingering oven's warmth, needled into him despite his upturned collar. Harmony Creek festered. He thought, poisoned at the well by the serpent's kiss, he needed answers to cauterize the wound. He sought them first in a dim pool hall a few blocks distant, where the air hung thick with stale smoke and murmured secrets. Above the entrance, a buzzing neon sign proclaimed, "Cue and Cushion." Sal, the proprietor, a sinewy old man, registered Chuck with a flicker of recognition from a life best forgotten, offering only a curt nod as he chalked his cue. "Sal," Chuck rumbled, his voice barely audible above the percussive symphony of colliding billiard balls. "Serpent's kiss. Tell me." Sal's gaze darted around the room, laced with paranoia. He leaned in, voice a gravelly rasp. "Viper calls the shots now and no one says no. Protection. Dope. Anything he wants, he bleeds the town dry for." "How deep does it go?" A shrug, laden with implication. "Every damn corner of Harmony Creek, creeping into the next county. Cops on the payroll, judges in his pocket, that they're everywhere, watching." Chuck watched the silent ballet of the 8-ball, the methodical clicks a counterpoint to the storm raging within him. Viper himself. What's he like? Heartless. Sal spat into a nearby ashtray. Ice water in his veins that he don't give a damn who suffers, long as he gets his way. Leaving the pool hall felt like shouldering an anvil. The grim confirmation weighed heavily that he needed first-hand knowledge of Viper. 2 days of whispered questions and furtive glances followed, leading Chuck to an abandoned textile mill on the town's edge of Viper's domain. The crumbling husk reeked of rot and lost hope that he parked his truck a good distance away, the cooling engine ticking like a nervous clock. The mill was caged by a chain-link fence crowned with rusted barbs, peering through gaps in the decaying corrugated iron. He glimpsed harsh lights and felt the pulse of muffled music. For an hour, he observed, every nerve screaming awareness. Vehicles trickled in and out, their occupants exchanging furtive glances that hard-faced men with etched scars patrolled the perimeter, their vigilance unsettlingly casual. Then he saw him. Viper emerged from the mill's main entrance, flanked by 2 brutes carved from granite. Smaller than Chuck anticipated, Viper radiated an undeniable power at a coiled predator. His eyes swept the surroundings with chilling discernment. His tailored suit, pristine against the mill squalor, was a flag of corrupted ambition. A young man approached, head bowed in supplication, hands trembling like aspen leaves. Chuck couldn't hear the exchange, but he witnessed Viper's face harden into granite. A swift backhand sent the young man sprawling into the mud. The two flanking figures moved with practiced ease, delivering a brutal, silent beating. Viper observed the spectacle with detached amusement, a cruel smile twisting his lips when the enforcers ceased their assault. Leaving the young man a moaning heap, Viper spat on him and retreated back into the mill. The cold, calculated cruelty burned into Chuck's soul. This was more than just racketeering. This was about absolute dominion, about extinguishing any spark of defiance. He grasped the true extent of the rot. The Serpent's Kiss wasn't a gang. It was a devouring malignancy on Harmony Creek. He backed away, the image of the broken youth branded onto his memory. The truck's engine roared to life, shattering the desolate silence. He had seen enough. Observation had run its course. The hour for action loomed. A deal with the devil. Heat shimmered above the quarry's fractured expanse, mimicking the roiling unease in Chuck's stomach. Leaning against his truck, the sunset splashed crimson hues across its aged frame. The air, acrid with the tang of spent explosives and decay, felt like a grim omen for their parley. A black Cadillac, obsidian and gleaming, sliced through the landscape. Twin sentinels emerged, their gazes hard and predatory as they swept the perimeter. Then Viper unfolded from the plush interior, his bespoke suit a jarring note against the rugged backdrop. His movements held a sinuous grace that put Chuck on edge, like watching a predator coil before a strike. "Harrison," Viper greeted, his voice like honed steel. "Imagine my surprise. I expected you to remain in hiding." Chuck offered no reply, his gaze unwavering. He wouldn't betray a sliver of the anxiety clawing at him. "What brings you to this picturesque locale?" Viper inquired, gesturing with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Have you decided to pledge allegiance after all?" Chuck finally broke the silence, his voice a gravelly rasp. "I want Maria Vargas free." The smile on Viper's face remained, but the warmth vanished from his eyes. Maria. Diligent. Loyal. Until recently, that is. She and her family are to be released from the Serpent's Kiss, Chuck declared, cutting to the heart of the matter. "I'm here to ensure it." A dry chuckle escaped Viper's lips, devoid of any genuine amusement. "You think you can simply extricate people from my organization with money, Harrison? This isn't some backwater trading post." Chuck reached inside his jacket and produced a thick envelope, which he deposited at Viper's feet. It landed with a muffled sound, stirring a miniature whirlwind of dust. 20,000. More than they're worth to you as pawns. Viper didn't deign to glance at the offering. "Sentimentality is a crippling flaw." Chuck. 1 I assumed you, of all people, understood. True allegiance can't be bought. "Allegiance enforced through fear isn't allegiance," Chuck retorted. "It's indentured servitude." Viper's eyes narrowed to slits. "Tread carefully, old man, you're venturing into dangerous territory." He closed the distance, his voice dropping to a sibilant whisper. "Maria's family. They possess considerable value, certain knowledge. Knowledge that could prove problematic for some." "What is it you really want?" Chuck pressed, his jaw rigid. He anticipated this wouldn't be a simple transaction. "I want you to comprehend your position," Viper purred, his voice regaining its silken quality. "Harmony Creek is under my dominion. Everyone within it is, eventually, mine. You included. However, I am feeling benevolent today. 20,000. That barely covers Maria herself. Her family, that's another question." He paused, allowing his words to hang in the oppressive air, thick with menace. "Her mother," Viper resumed, a cruel twist to his lips. "She has been cooperative, providing insights, ensuring Maria's continued compliance. A pity if something unforeseen were to befall her, an unfortunate mishap, perhaps, and the younger brother. Such a promising LDIT would be regrettable if he were to become misplaced." Chuck's fists clenched, a tempest brewing within him. He struggled to contain his boiling rage. Leave them out of this, Viper. Why would I? Viper questioned, feigning innocence. They are collateral. They guarantee Maria's acquiescence. And now they ensure yours. Name your price, Chuck demanded, his voice strained to the breaking point. Viper laughed again, a mirthless sound that echoed across the desolate landscape. My price? Ah, that's the beauty of it, Chuck. It's whatever I desire it to be. Whenever I desire it, perhaps I'll decree your disappearance. Perhaps I'll task you with something distasteful, something that violates your precious code of honor. The possibilities are as vast as my imagination. Chuck knew he was being manipulated. Money was immaterial to Viper. Control, the act of breaking him, was the prize. You believe threats will sway me? Chuck challenged, his voice dangerously calm. Threats? My dear Chuck, Viper corrected, his eyes glinting with perverse enjoyment. These are merely observations, Maria and her family. Their destinies are irrevocably linked to my whims, and consequently to yours. He paused, letting the weight of his pronouncements sink in. Reflect on this, Chuck. Weigh your options, and bear in mind, every path has its consequences. Viper turned and glided back to the Cadillac, his bodyguards shadowing his every move. He settled into the rear seat, the engine rumbling to life as the Cadillac roared away. A plume of dust billowing in its wake, Chuck stood alone in the desolate quarry, the setting sun painting long, ominous streaks across the ground. The envelope containing $20,000 lay discarded at his feet. He recognized, with grim certainty, that this wasn't a mere negotiation, that it was a declaration of hostilities. And he had just suffered the opening salvo, forging a shield. The taste of quarry dust still clung to the back of Chuck's throat as he surveyed the Rodriguez bakery. The aroma of pan dulce usually soothed him, but tonight, it felt like a siren song, drawing the serpent's kiss closer. Viper wanted information, and he'd use Maria and her family to get it. Chuck wouldn't let that happen. Miguel, he called, his voice gruff, the sound echoing slightly in the empty shop. Grab a broom handle. Miguel, wiping flour from his hands, looked at Chuck with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. A broom handle? Why? Self-defense, Chuck said. Stating the obvious, he saw the doubt flicker in Miguel's eyes. Viper won't send flowers. He'll send men who know how to hurt. You need to know how to defend yourself, your mother. The word mother seemed to ignite something in Miguel. He straightened his shoulders and grabbed a sturdy wooden handle. Chuck showed him a basic stance, feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent. Miguel mirrored the movements, his brow furrowed in concentration. Now, hold it like this, Chuck instructed, adjusting Miguel's grip. Imagine it's an extension of your arm. Use it to keep them at bay. He spent the next hour drilling Miguel on simple blocks, thrusts, and sweeps. Miguel was clumsy at first, his movements hesitant. But with each repetition, he gained confidence. Chuck pushed him, not brutally, but firmly, demanding focus. He saw a spark of determination ignite within the young man. Again, Chuck barked as Miguel stumbled. Don't telegraph your moves. Surprise is your friend. As dusk deepened, painting the bakery windows in shades of purple and orange, Chuck transitioned from teaching Miguel to defense to teaching him how to fortify their position. They'll likely come at night, Chuck said, pulling out his worn carpenter's toolkit. He'd always been good with his hands, even before he started breaking bones for a living. Now, he'd use those skills to build a shield. He started by reinforcing the doors and windows. He used thick oak planks to create makeshift shutters, bolting them securely from the inside. He angled shards of broken glass along the window ledges, a crude but effective deterrent. Maria watched him, her face a mask of worry. Chuck, she said softly, her voice trembling. Are you sure this is necessary? Isn't there another way? Chuck paused, his hammer suspended in midair. He met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a grim resolve. Viper doesn't negotiate. Maria, that he takes. He'll keep coming until he gets what he wants, or until we stop him. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also a flicker of understanding. She knew what Viper was capable of. She'd seen it firsthand. What can I do? She asked, her voice stronger now. Help me with these, Chuck said, gesturing towards a pile of lumber. And trust me, we'll get through this. He explained his plan. He was setting up a series of simple traps. A tripwire attached to a stack of metal baking trays near the back entrance. A scattering of marbles near the front door, designed to send intruders sprawling. Nothing lethal, but enough to create chaos and buy them time. Miguel, his earlier awkwardness replaced by a newfound purpose, worked alongside Chuck, his youthful energy fueling their efforts. He learned quickly, anticipating Chuck's needs, handing him tools, and offering suggestions. The rhythmic clang of the hammer and the rasp of the saw filled the bakery, replacing the sweet aroma of pastries with the scent of sawdust and raw timber as the night wore on. The bakery transformed. It was no longer a place of warmth and comfort, but a fortress, hardened and prepared for battle. Chuck surveyed their work, a rare hint of satisfaction on his face. It wasn't perfect, but it would buy them time. Time to figure out what Viper wanted, and how to stop him. Maria looked around, her expression a mixture of fear and gratitude. Thank you, Chuck, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For everything. Chuck simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the darkened street outside. The night was still young, and the storm was coming crimson dawn. The first sign wasn't a bang, but a soft hiss. Miguel, perched on the roof with the modified telescope Chuck had shown him how to use, saw it first. A wisp of pale smoke curling from the alley across the street. Then, the shattering of glass, a Molotov cocktail, crude but effective, had been hurled through the bakery's front window. Chuck! Miguel screamed, scrambling down the ladder. Fire! Chuck was already moving. He'd been sleeping lightly on a cot in the back, every nerve thrumming with anticipation. The smell of gasoline and burning sugar hit him as he burst into the main room. The rudimentary sprinkler system he'd rigged, garden hoses fed by a large water tank on the roof, activated with a whoosh, dousing the flames with a spray that smelled faintly of chlorine. Maria, clutching a rosary, stumbled from her room. Dios mío! What's happening? Stay back! Chuck barked, his voice a low growl that he grabbed the shotgun he'd stashed behind the counter. The cold steel familiar and comforting in his grip. Outside, the chaos escalated. Figures emerged from the alley, their faces masked with bandanas, brandishing pipes and knives. The serpent's kiss had arrived. The tripwires Chuck had laid across the street, almost invisible in the pre-dawn gloom, did their job. A volley of paint-filled balloons, rigged to spray on contact, exploded in the faces of the lead attackers, momentarily blinding them. It bought them precious seconds. Miguel, get behind the oven, Chuck yelled, firing a warning shot over the heads of the advancing gang members. The boom of the shotgun echoed through the street. One of the masked figures, ignoring the paint, charged forward, swinging a metal pipe. Chuck sidestepped the blow with surprising agility and slammed the butt of the shotgun into the attacker's temple. The man crumpled to the ground. More of them swarmed forward, emboldened by their numbers. Maria, despite her fear, found a strange sense of purpose. She grabbed a heavy rolling pin and stood beside Chuck, her eyes wide but resolute. I will not let them destroy what my husband built, she declared, her voice trembling but firm. The air filled with the sounds of shattering glass, shouts, and the clang of metal on metal. Miguel, remembering Chuck's lessons, peeked out from behind the massive oven, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw one of the gang members trying to pry open the reinforced back door. He grabbed a bag of flour, ripped it open, and hurled it at the attacker. The cloud of white powder momentarily obscured the man's vision, giving Miguel the opportunity to slam a cast-iron skillet against the back of his head. The attacker staggered back, clutching his head, giving up on the door for the moment. Chuck, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of controlled violence. He moved with a brutal efficiency. His movements economical and deadly. A right hook sent one attacker sprawling into a stack of overturned flour sacks. A swift kick to the groin doubled over. Another, but they kept coming, wave after wave. Their numbers seemingly endless. One managed to slip past Chuck and grabbed Maria. Pulling her towards him, she screamed. Time seemed to slow. Chuck felt a cold fury rise within him. A familiar darkness he had tried so hard to suppress. He dropped the shotgun and launched himself at the attacker. Tackling him to the ground, he unleashed a series of brutal punches, each one fueled by years of repressed rage. "Get off her!" he roared, his voice raw with fury. Miguel, seeing his mother in danger, charged forward. Brandishing the skillet, he swung it with all his might, connecting with the attacker's shoulder. The man yelped in pain and released Maria. The tide began to turn. The paint-filled balloons, the tripwires, the surprise flower attack, it all added up. The serpent's kiss, expecting an easy victory, found themselves facing unexpected resistance. A figure in the back yelled, "Vamonos! This ain't worth it." The remaining attackers, bruised, battered, and covered in paint and flour, began to retreat, disappearing back into the alley from whence they came. Silence descended upon the bakery, broken only by the dripping of water from the sprinkler system and Maria's ragged breaths. The air hung thick with the smell of smoke, gasoline, and spilled flour. Chuck stood panting, his knuckles bruised and bloody, his eyes scanning the street, searching for any sign of a return attack. Maria clung to Miguel, her body trembling. Are they gone?" she whispered. Chuck didn't answer. He knew this was just the beginning. The serpent's kiss wouldn't give up so easily. This crimson dawn was just a prelude to a much darker day, under siege. The scent of burnt sugar and gasoline hung heavy in the night air, a grim reminder of the last assault. Chuck reloaded the shotgun, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence. Miguel was patching up a makeshift barricade using a discarded metal rack and some plywood. His face smudged with soot and exhaustion. Maria, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute, was checking their dwindling supply of flour, their only remaining weapon of any real consequence. "They'll be back," Chuck said, his voice a low rumble. "And they'll be ready this time." Miguel swallowed hard, glancing at his mother. What do we do?" "We hold our ground," Maria said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "This bakery is all we have left of Papa." Chuck knew holding their ground wouldn't be enough. Viper wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted, or until they were all dead. He just hoped he could delay the inevitable long enough to figure out what that was. The distant rumble of engines shattered the uneasy calm. This time, it was more than just a couple of cars. Headlights cut through the darkness, converging on the bakery like predatory eyes. "Get ready," Chuck ordered, positioning himself near the front window. 3 cars screeched to a halt, blocking the street. Men piled out, faces masked, weapons glinting under the streetlights. Viper, flanked by 2 hulking figures, emerged from the lead vehicle. He surveyed the bakery, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Looks like the rats are still in the trap," he called out, his voice amplified by a megaphone. "Come out now, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let the woman and the boy live. As for you, Harrison, you know the score." Chuck didn't bother responding. He raised his shotgun, the barrel gleaming in the dim light. The first volley of bullets tore through the plywood barricade, splintering the wood and sending shards flying. Miguel ducked behind a stack of flour sacks, his eyes wide with terror. "Stay down," Chuck yelled, firing back at the attackers. The shotgun blast ripped through the night, sending one of Viper's goons stumbling backward. The assault intensified. A hail of bullets hammered against the bakery's brick walls, chipping away at the mortar and shattering windows. Chuck returned fire, methodically picking off targets, but they were too many. He glanced at Maria, who was desperately trying to reinforce the back door with whatever she could find. The barricade finally gave way. With a roar, the serpent's kiss surged forward, pouring into the bakery. Chuck fired again, dropping another attacker, but they kept coming, a relentless wave of violence. "Inside!" he shouted, grabbing Miguel by the arm and pulling him towards the back. Maria followed, slamming the door shut behind them. The bakery was now a claustrophobic battlefield. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear. The sounds of shattering glass and shouted threats echoed through the small space. Chuck took cover behind the overturned counter, firing at the attackers who were trying to force their way through the door. Miguel, his face pale, grabbed a rolling pin and stood beside his mother, ready to defend her. Maria had armed herself with a heavy cast-iron skillet, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination. The door splintered, then burst open. Viper stepped through the wreckage, his eyes fixed on Chuck. "Impressive," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But this ends now." A brutal close-quarters fight erupted. Chuck, wielding his shotgun like a club, moved with a speed and ferocity that belied his age. He dodged knife thrusts, parried blows, and delivered bone-jarring strikes. But he was outnumbered. One of Viper's men managed to flank him, landing a blow to his head with a metal pipe. Chuck staggered, momentarily disoriented. Viper seized the opportunity, lunging forward with a knife. Maria, seeing Chuck in danger, screamed and charged at Viper, swinging the skillet. With all her might, the skillet connected with Viper's face, sending him stumbling backward, clutching his nose. "You bitch!" he roared, wiping blood from his face. He shoved her aside and turned his attention back to Chuck, who was now regaining his footing. Miguel, fueled by adrenaline and fear for his mother, hurled a bag of flour at Viper. The flour exploded in a white cloud, momentarily blinding him. "Get them out of here, Chuck!" Maria yelled, grabbing another skillet. "I'll hold them off." Chuck knew she couldn't hold them off for long, but he also knew that arguing with her would be a waste of time. He grabbed Miguel and dragged him towards the back exit. "We'll be back for you, Mama," Miguel cried, his voice choked with tears. Chuck didn't respond. He knew the odds were stacked against them. But he also knew that he couldn't let Maria die. He had to find a way to turn the tables on Viper, even if it meant embracing the darkness he had tried so hard to leave behind. Unleashed. The world sharpened its edges. Gunpowder's sharp bite vied for dominance with the bakery's familiar, doughy aroma. A sweetness now soured by the coppery tang of blood. Miguel lay sprawled near the toppled counter, his shirt blossoming with crimson. A frigid, keen rage stabbed through the years of practiced numbness. A beast Chuck thought long caged. The fury that had christened him the Hammer stirred within. "Miguel!" He knelt beside the youth, his touch gentle despite the tempest raging within. Miguel's eyelids flickered, revealing eyes glazed with agony and bewilderment. "Chuck, they got Mom." The words rasped, barely audible. The last tether snapped. The Hammer had awakened. Chuck carefully hauled Miguel upright, ignoring the white-hot lance in his own shoulder. He eased him against the wall, ripping his shirt to staunch the bleeding. "Hold tight. We're getting you out." His voice rumbled low, a primal sound foreign even to his own ears. His gaze swept the devastated bakery. Seeking lingering threats, Viper and his ilk had already melted back into the shadows, assured of their victory. They were mistaken. He assisted Miguel to stand, ignoring the wince that contorted the young man's features. "Can you manage?" Miguel nodded, pale but determined. "Yeah, that I can." Supporting him, Chuck guided him towards the rear exit, senses screaming, each groan of the floorboards, every whisper of wind outside, magnified in his heightened state. He felt the shackles of the past disintegrate, replaced by a singular, incandescent need. Rescue Maria and make Viper bleed. He shoved Miguel out back, into the relative obscurity of the alley. "Stay put. Stay hidden." Miguel clutched his arm, eyes brimming with entreaty. "Chuck, please, he's different now. He's a corpse walking," Chuck stated, his tone devoid of all warmth. He unclasped Miguel's grip. "Stay." He re-entered the bakery, the scene of devastation fueling the inferno within. Shards of glass glittered like malevolent jewels, Bullet holes pocked the walls, and flour coated everything in a ghostly shroud. He moved with a speed and economy honed over decades. Each motion precise and lethal. He located his quarry. A hefty iron rolling pin, miraculously unscathed amidst the carnage. He grasped it, its weight familiar and reassuring. An extension of his will. He knew Viper's lair. The warehouse district, his usual haunt. He navigated the streets like a wraith, unseen, unheard. His focus a laser beam locked onto his target. The city dissolved into a muted backdrop, the cacophony fading to a distant drone. Only Viper mattered. The warehouse loomed, a vast cavern reeking of stale diesel and decay. Chuck melted into the shadows. Guided by instinct, he heard voices in the distance, the boastful cadence of men drunk on power. He found them in a makeshift office. Viper holding court, Maria trussed, and silenced in a chair beside him. Viper was recounting the bakery assault, savoring each detail with nauseating self-satisfaction. Chuck offered no prelude. He simply rammed the door inward, the wood screaming in protest. The laughter choked and died. Viper whirled, surprise flashing across his features before hardening into a cruel smile. Well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. Thought we'd finally broken you, old-timer. Chuck remained silent, lifting the rolling pin. The ensuing brawl was a maelstrom of fury and desperation. Viper was quick, lithe, relying on speed and reach. Chuck, however, was a human avalanche. His movements driven by unadulterated rage. He absorbed the blows, ignored the searing pain. His focus unwavering. He fought with a savagery that took even him aback. With a brutal parry, he disarmed Viper, the knife skittering across the concrete. He cornered Viper against the wall, the rolling pin a stark promise in his grasp. Where is she going? Chuck's voice was a guttural growl. Viper spat, the gobbet landing on Chuck's cheek. Rot in hell. Chuck didn't flinch. He swung the rolling pin, the sickening crack echoing in the vast space. Viper slumped. Unconscious, he swiftly freed Maria, checking her for wounds. You all right? She nodded, her eyes pools of fear and relief. Chuck, we're not finished. He glanced back at Viper, stirring weakly on the floor. Chuck raised the rolling pin again, his face a frozen mask of implacable wrath. He wouldn't falter. This time, he would end it. The serpent's fall. The hammer waited, its polished head a distorted mirror reflecting the neons buzzed at Viper's face. A bloody, terrified gargoyle, was a study in impending doom. Chuck's grip was a vice, his breath a ragged counterpoint to the viscous silence that reeked of iron. This isn't finished, Viper choked, his voice a wet rattle in his throat. At a futile shift ignited a fresh wave of agony from his mangled leg. Chuck remained mute. Words were a currency he'd long since stopped spending. He'd gambled with them once, years before, and lost everything. Now, only the language of action remained. The hammer began its measured descent. But it didn't fall upon Viper's skull. Instead, a sickening crunch marked the destruction of Viper's remaining kneecap. A scream erupted from Viper, a bestial howl that clawed at the night. The sound, stripped raw, silenced even the alley's scavenging rats. Chuck lowered the hammer. Its weight suddenly felt crushing. He didn't crave Viper's death. An absolution too easily won. He desired Viper's prolonged understanding of the suffering he'd sown. A living testament to the desolation violence breeds. Consider this an initial payment. Chuck's voice rumbled, a low, dangerous tremor, against the debt you've accrued. The serpent's kiss, stunned into inaction by the savage turn, finally registered their leader's collapse. Panic, like a virulent contagion, seized them. The swagger that had fueled their attack dissolved, supplanted by a primal surge for survival. A mountainous figure, scalp shaved and skin a canvas of ink, edged toward Chuck. But the mere shift of Chuck's weight, the subtle elevation of the hammer, was enough. The brute faltered, his face a battleground between aggression and stark terror. He glanced at Viper, a ruin on the ground, then back at Chuck, his eyes wide pools of fear. He retreated a step, then another, and another. That was all it required. Like a breached levee, The serpent's kiss dissolved. They scattered, a flurry of limbs and curses vaulting over refuse and scrambling through the grimy debris. Their panicked exodus, pounding feet, desperate cries, the clang of discarded weapons, filled the fetid air. Chuck watched them flee. His face a mask of stone, he made no move to pursue. His mission was complete. Viper broken, his viper nest scattered. The aftermath belonged to law and order. He turned his gaze to Viper, still convulsing in torment. Chuck knelt, his expression grim that he retrieved his phone, punching in 911. "I need an ambulance," he stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "And the police. Multiple injuries. Alley off for scene near the old warehouse." He recited the address and severed the connection as he rose, his body a symphony of aches, his muscles screaming in defiance. The ghost of every blow landed, every cut inflicted, lingered, but beneath the physical wreckage lay something else, not relief, precisely, perhaps closure taking root. Or simply the hollow satisfaction of obligation fulfilled. The approaching whine of sirens grew louder, closer, slicing through the night. Chuck looked down at Viper, who now whimpered, a mingling of agony and dread in his eyes. "It's done, Viper," Chuck said, his voice a low, flinty rasp. "It's finally done." The first squad cars shrieked to a halt at the alley's mouth. Officers swarmed out, weapons drawn, their faces grim masks of authority. They took in the scene, the toppled bins, the abandoned weapons, the blood-soaked paving stones, and Viper, a writhing effigy of pain, and their expressions hardened further. "Police, freeze, don't move!" The shouted command echoed, amplified by the alley's claustrophobic confines. Chuck slowly raised his hands, the hammer still welded to his grip. He offered no resistance as officers advanced, their movements measured and wary. They relieved him of the hammer, handling it with a mix of awe and unease. Other officers moved in to secure Viper, carefully securing his wrists despite his anguished protests. Paramedics arrived, their faces a study in professional detachment as they began assessing Viper's grievous injuries. That as Chuck was being escorted away, a familiar face emerged from the knot of officers, Detective Reynolds, the lead on Miguel's case. Reynolds met Chuck's eyes, his expression enigmatic. There was no condemnation, no judgment, just a world-weary understanding. Reynolds offered a near-imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the deed, a grim understanding of the weight Chuck carried. Chuck submitted to being led away, his head held high. He anticipated the reckoning. He understood the price, but seated in the back of the patrol car, sirens wailing a mournful dirge, a strange serenity settled over him. The serpent's kiss was shattered, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Chuck could draw a clean breath, echoes of peace. The ghost of disinfectant clung to Chuck as he entered the hospital. Miguel lay amidst a landscape of livid bruises, while Maria sat vigil, her gaze a reservoir of strength despite reddened eyes. "Chuck," she began, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I don't know how to thank you." He merely inclined his head, shifting under the weight of their gratitude. "How's he holding up?" he asked, indicating Miguel. "Hurts like hell," Miguel rasped, a wan smile flickering across his face. "But better," said, "I'll be out in days." His look held a mixture of gratitude and something akin to reverence. "What you pulled against Viper," Chuck stopped him with a raised palm. "Forget it." He had no wish to rehash the brutality, nor for Miguel to fixate on it. "Just heal." Maria squeezed Miguel's forearm. "He will. We both will." The room lapsed into silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic pulse of medical equipment. A dormant feeling stirred within Chuck, a whisper of belonging. He tamped it down ruthlessly. For a man like him, connection was a phantom. Later that week, Chuck found himself driving past the Rodriguez bakery. He wasn't sure what he expected, perhaps a skeletal ruin, sealed off and forlorn. Instead, he found a whirlwind of industrious activity. Neighbors, friends, even complete strangers were transforming the space. The sharp, clean scent of freshly cut lumber and drying paint replaced the lingering miasma of fear. He parked and observed Miguel, arms supported by a sling, orchestrating a team of volunteers with an unexpected verve. Inside, Maria oversaw the organization and resupply with an efficiency that belied her earlier distress. Banners proclaiming Rodriguez Bakery, reborn by the community and Chicago stands strong, snapped in the breeze that he recognized Mrs. Gabrowski from down the street, meticulously arranging geraniums in the window boxes. A heavily tattooed man unloaded sacks of flour, his movements surprisingly gentle. The defiant heart of the neighborhood beat strong. For a long moment, Chuck watched, a fragile bud of hope unfurling within him. Perhaps goodness endured. Perhaps even he could find a haven in it. Miguel noticed him and waved, his smile genuine and wide. Hesitation flickered across Chuck's face before he unfolded himself from the car. "Chuck! Check it out," Miguel called, his voice ringing with excitement. "We're practically done. It'll be better than before." Chuck approached, gravel crunching beneath his boots, his gaze taking in the vibrant scene. "Looks good," he conceded, his voice rough around the edges. "It is," Miguel asserted, his eyes bright. "Grand reopening next week. You gotta be there." Chuck shuffled his feet, uncomfortable. He wasn't one for celebrations. "I don't know." "Please," Miguel insisted, his expression open. "It wouldn't be the same without you." He looked at the young man, at the raw optimism radiating from him, and found himself unable to refuse. "All right," he agreed. "I'll be there." The following week, the Rodriguez Bakery throbbed with life. The inviting fragrance of baking bread and sugary pastries intermingled with the joyful cacophony of voices. The grand reopening proved a resounding triumph. Chuck stood apart, nursing a water glass, a silhouette against the light. He felt alien, a stranger in a foreign land. But Maria and Miguel ensured he didn't remain an outsider for long. "Thank you for coming," Maria said, her tone saturated with warmth as she touched his arm. "It means the world to us." "You were incredible, Chuck," Miguel added, clapping him heartily on the shoulder. "Truly." Chuck nodded, surveying the assembled crowd. He witnessed the pure joy on Maria's face, the pride shining in Miguel's eyes, the unwavering solidarity of the community. He had been instrumental in this renaissance, played a pivotal role in restoring their shattered world. As the evening waned, Chuck prepared to depart. He found Maria and Miguel by the entrance, watching the last well-wishers drift away. "Heading out," he announced. Maria turned to him, her gaze searching. "What now?" Chuck shrugged. "Back to my life. Quiet, undisturbed." "Will you be all right?" Miguel asked, a worried crease forming between his brows. Chuck studied them, the glowing bakery, the bustling streets softened by the glow of the street lamps. He knew he was irrevocably changed. The specter of violence would forever linger, but so too would the faint, sweet echoes of peace, of kinship, of renewed hope. "Yeah," he affirmed, a ghost of a smile gracing his lips. "I'll be all right." He paused, then added, "You too. Look after one another." He turned and melted into the darkness. He was leaving a fragment of himself behind, an aspect he hadn't even known existed. But he knew he was entrusting them to capable hands, to the embrace of a community that would safeguard, uplift, and cherish them. And that, he understood, was enough that he could finally return to his own existence, finally find a measure of solace.